Hi, my name is Ashley Siri, and I am a third grade teacher at Jackson Elementary School in Greeley, Colorado. For my project, I decided to focus on refugee learners and family literacy. I specifically had an interest in family literacy when it had came to refugee learners, both adults and students, because of this quote on the screen, we tend not to pay much attention to the unprecedented transnational movement of people, nor are we aware of the challenges that many children and families encounter when they transition to their new countries. So, a big reason for my interest is actually where I teach, which is Jackson Elementary. Um, we had a huge influx of refugees in the 2022 to 2023 school year, which was the year I student taught. So it was the year before I was hired. And that has only grown. So in 2023 and 2024, 40.9% or 188 of our students were at an M1 or M2 level, meaning they are limited English proficient. So that's not even including our students who are still refugees or who are still immigrants who are at um a a full English or a FEP level or a NEP or a LEP or a less English proficient level, which is students who are gaining more language and are not like just coming into the country. In my classroom alone, oh my gosh, I have what? Sorry, I have about 5 or 6 students who are immigrants, or actually more, probably close to 10 students who are immigrants or migrants. So in our school overall, in 2023, 72 students are immigrants. 52 students are migrants, and part of those, a big part of our my immigrant population or our refugee population is Rohingya Muslim refugees, which are from Burma, which is now called Myanmar. Um, and over 22 languages are spoken. So I was like, this is a great topic to focus on because it also includes different dialects. We have Spanish and we have students who speak many different dialects of Spanish because they all don't come from the same country. We have students from Guatemala, we have students from Venezuela, we have students from Mexico, we have students from Colombia who all speak a different dialect. So we all have to figure out strategies and scaffolds to in order to work in. And it has just been something that I have loved doing. So I really wanted to focus in on how I could better my understanding of what it's like to be a refugee student coming in and having to be in an environment that is new, that they've never been in before, that they're not used to. So yeah, that's kind of why I decided to study this. And it's also, these refugee students have a special place in my heart because they are some of the most hardworking and kindest people that you will ever meet. So yeah. Um, so when I was researching, I found that refugees, so the definition of a refugee is a person who is forced from their home and are resettled in a different country. According to Anderson, 244 people overall live outside their country. And a statistic that I found is that according to the United Nations Refugee Agency, there are about 122.6 million refugees in the world and over many years. About half of those refugees are students. And in the past 2 years in the United States, in 2023, we had 60,000 refugees settled. And in 2024, we have had 68,000 refugees settled. So that is a overall of 128,000 refugees settled in the United States and have been put into our school system. And a lot of times those refugees are coming from places that are unstable or conflict ridden. Conflicts are what is forcing the families to leave their home country. A lot of the times the families don't want to, but it's not safe for them to be there, so they have to leave. A lot of my students that we see in my school are coming from countries such as Myanmar, Guatemala, South Sudan, Venezuela, Eritrea, Mexico, Syria. A new one is Palestine is starting to settle some refugees. So a big part of my research was on Rohingya and Arab students. So Rohingyas, I'm just going to kind of define what those groups are so then we can understand it. So Rohingya students are from Myanmar, which used to be known as Burma. It's a country in Southeast Asia that is primarily Buddhist. Like their country is Buddhist. Their official religion is Buddhism. So um, the Rohingya is an ethnic Muslim group that is not recognized by the government due to religious persecution and ethnic persecution. They are the largest group of stateless ethnic group, which means they are not citizens of any country, and oftentimes they are denied citizenship. And there has always been tension between the Myanmar government and the Rakhine state, which is where a lot of Rohingya Muslims are found, which actually where majority of them are found. So, and in 2017 there was violence that occurred due to the persecution that the Rohingya Muslims were facing. So there was a group of Rohingya Muslim rebels that committed some violence acts, and in response, the Myanmar government has started to commit a genocide. So you see a mass refugee crisis happening in Myanmar with the Rohingya state, with them either being forced into Bangladesh into refugee camps, or some of them, a lot of my students come from Malaysia, from the Malaysian refugee camps. Another one that I focused on was Arab refugees, specifically from Syria and Iraq. They also have a difficult time adjusting to these countries, to their new homes. They have experienced trauma as a result of famine, torture, or war. And a lot of times, both groups have spent a lot of time in refugee camps, which don't always have great resources, are not always well funded, are not always clean. They don't have access to education. So when they come to the United States, they don't always feel welcomed or understand the culture of our education system or the culture in general. So they have this trauma, and then they're forced to move from their home country that they love and are settled into a new place and are basically like shell shocked, is a lot of what the feelings I got. So in specifically the school and education for refugee students is a critical component of promoting resettlement and social inclusion, in order for them to almost get over that trauma and that feeling of being forced from their home. And a lot of the times what I read is parents want to be involved in their education, but a lot of the times there's not access for them. They're either unable to understand the communication that comes because the schools are not prepared to communicate two ways into their language because they haven't learned English yet. They don't understand the culture of what it means to be in an American school system. A lot of Middle Eastern cultures don't understand the um, volunteering at a school that's not part of their school culture. A lot of the time, school is separate from the home in these countries. Students go to school and that's that. And then they come home and they're completely separate things. Some families, another struggle that some families have is some will arrive in areas that are well funded, like here in Greeley. The refugees programs are very well funded, so a lot of our students do have these supports, and our district is also well funded to support these refugees. However, others in other states and other areas will have struggle gaining access to housing or healthcare dependent on where they are resettled to. And then many families actually want to integrate instead of assimilate or include. So they often abandon their home language, which is something that is special to them and it's their culture and it's something that connects them back to their home country, in a desire for them and their children to learn the dominant language in their new country. I have some students who speak multiple languages. My Rohingya students speak Arabic, they speak Rohingya, they speak Malay, and they also speak English. So these students are just, they're multilingual. However, they're sometimes feeling like, oh, I shouldn't speak it because English is what is spoken. It's the dominant language, which we learned is a big aspect of the school culture, is that English is the dominant language. So we don't adhere to other languages spoken. And it also affects family literacy programs because they don't cater to multiple languages. They don't cater to cultures. And so these families who are trying to assimilate to the countries feel like they have to abandon their culture, and they can't join in family literacy programs because they won't understand the language. Um, so another thing was schools are focusing too much on concentrated skills and too little on unconcentrated ones in early grades. I see this a lot with my refugee students is they have the constrained skills down because a lot of the times they already know how to do that. But it's when they're trying to do the unconstrained skills in a new language that makes it harder. And especially in third grade, students need to be able to comprehend, which requires them to understand words that they don't ever hear in a spoken language and to integrate new language with background information that they don't have. They are learning a new language, so they don't understand the words that are rarely encountered. They don't have the relevant background information, so we need to be focusing on vocabulary, grammar, social story structure, telling narratives. My students who are refugees struggle so much with being able to tell narratives. When I tell them write a story, they don't understand how to do it. They don't understand how to write a story structure, and their vocabulary is weak. On our CMAS data, our vocabulary is our weakest point, not because we have so many language learners and their vocabulary still needs to be developed. And in our younger grades, it is so important for these students to be engaging in pretend play. That was mentioned in our textbook. That was mentioned in this article that I read. Engaging in pretend play allows students to develop these stories, which gives them the ability to comprehend and build story structure and to tell narratives and to give descriptions. Another thing is a lot of these students are coming in without topic specific knowledge. So a lot of my students have never had school before they enter in. So I could have a third grader who has never been in school because they've been growing up in a refugee camp. And so they don't have the background knowledge that a lot of my other students who were born in the United States or who were refugees but have been here in school longer. They don't have that background knowledge. So then they struggle. So we focus really on building that up. And it's something that we really need to focus on is those unconstrained skills, because we focus so much on the constrained skills, even in third grade when we're teaching these students, that we often forget the unconstrained skills that they also need in order to have successful comprehension and be a successful reader. So, yeah. Um, I also, but the articles also focused on parent involvement in students' learning inside and outside the classroom. Um, it really focused on how we could support students, including um, allowing um, the refugee students to bring their culture into the family literacy programs and have their culture guide the family literacy programs, and allow them to orally tell stories, to tell songs, to share narratives from their cultures. And then another article I read really focused on the mothers of refugee students, specifically Rohingya students in the southern United States. So a lot of the Rohingya mothers that article focused on had many different ways to teach their students literacy that is not always found in the culture of American education. A lot of the time we expect parents to read with their students at home, but our refugee parents, because that is a strictly white middle upper class American thing, do not understand that concept. So they really struggle with this concept or this activity that we tell parents to do, and they don't know how to do it. So instead they're finding different ways. They're encouraging their students to read in their native language. They're encouraging their students to read in English. The mothers would take their students to an Asian marketplace that was run by another Rohingya adult, and they would have them reading like the backs of cereal boxes, the price tags, and all this different things. And they also found support in each other. A Rohingya mother who had been here much longer supported a Rohingya mother who had not been in the United States, which is super important because we need these people to find a community. So an example could be is we support our refugee families to finding other refugee families or other people in their culture, or finding a community where they can support each other in their learning. So these are kind of the things that I gave up with to support their students, or what teachers can do. So we need to provide specific opportunities to practice their oral language and vocabulary skills across content languages. Students struggle with oral language and their vocabulary skills. So we really need to focus on expanding those and allowing opportunities to practice, whether that's repeating a sentence back to them with the correct the correct grammatical structure, or we allow them to practice their oral language, talking, turning and talking. That's where those total participation techniques come in. Turn and talk. We have a protocol called back-to-back, face-to-face that we use in our classroom where students stand back-to-back and then they're face-to-face once they're ready to share it. Include books in their home language. I have books in Spanish. I have books in Malay in my classroom. That makes students feel like they are welcome into their classroom. We need to provide more opportunities for them to comprehend books, whether it's in their home language or we guide them in their understanding how to comprehend books. I use a lot of realia in my classroom when teaching reading to students. If there is an image in the book that I want them to understand, I point to it, especially when we're learning about frogs or other things they might not have background to. We also need to aim for integration. We do not want students to lose their culture or lose their language that they came with. We want to integrate them. We want to include their culture. A lot of the times when I'm talking about culture or when I'm talking about different things, I will ask my students about their culture and what they do and how they celebrate and how they learn at home, rather than saying, this is the way you have to do it because this is the way I've always done it. Another thing we can do is make sure to really focus on those unconstrained skills, especially in the earlier grades. So a lot of the times engaging in play in kindergarten and other early childhood years, this will help the students pick up on what we call playground language, which also incorporates their oral language skills. Exploring context-specific knowledges, we need to teach science and social studies. We need to allow the students to explore these topics they might not have had access to because they were in refugee camps, or they didn't have access to it because they weren't displaced from their home country. We also really need to focus on story structure and telling narratives, either from their home country or orally. And we need to encourage them to bring their own stories in and work with them on story structure, because that is a huge part of what we're missing. So another thing is how we can support parents. So we need to provide more opportunities for the parents to develop their literacy skills through a family literacy program, either at the district level or at the school level. It needs to be flexible to fit with parents' working schedules, because I have a lot of students who parents work from 2 until like midnight, and so they are not able to go after school. So maybe on the weekends or in the morning before school. We need to have families bring in their stories, riddles, and rhymes from their own culture to develop literacy skills. And we need to allow families to incorporate cultural models of literacy. We need to support families and students' literacy at home. We need to be clear and explain what it means to refugee families about reading to your child every night. A lot of the times they don't understand that, so we need to model it for parents about what it looks like to read for students. I also thought sending home vocabulary games for students and parents to practice would also be really good. We need to provide access to local literacy resources. District 6 here in Greeley has Family Center, provides programs for refugees and migrant families who are signed up for. And then we also need to provide access to local libraries and other possible family literacy programs that are either provided by the state or the schools or the district. So another thing that we can do to support our families is to include newsletters and other communication in English and the family's home language. So Canva actually translates documents. That is something I discovered this year. So I have translated my documents into Spanish. I've translated it into Triguinga. Oh my gosh, this language is so hard to pronounce, but it's from Eritrea. My kid who speaks it's gonna get so mad at me. Triguinga. I butchered that. Malay. I've also translated it into what's the other? Burmese. I've translated it into those 4 languages. Unfortunately, it does not have an option for Rohingya language, which is a limitation of just the language in general, because they do not actually have a standard form of written communication. So that is another struggle that we have, is that we have to figure out how to communicate with these parents, and oftentimes we are either using and so you can also use Google Translate. It's not as accurate, but it's also another resource. when we communicate with our Rohingya students, we often use a translating student or Rohingya parents. We often use a translating service such as Language Link. So it is a company that we call and can make and we can either have them translate face to face, or we can call, have them extend to a third party, and we can talk to a parent in Rohingya, which I think is super cool. So see if your school has a translating service such as Language Link or another example. Another thing is aim for integration, not assimilation. We want to include the parents in their we want to include the parents as much as possible and their culture. So that is a big thing that I really want to encourage, is we want to include their cultures as much as possible in our classroom so they can see themselves through their learning. Okay, so these are some different resources that I found that you can read. So one of the resources is The Newcomers, Finding Refuge, Friendship, and Hope in American by Helen Thorpe. I hope I didn't butcher that. I'm so bad at last names. This is it's an amazing story. It's about a group of refugees, high school refugees, who actually went to school at a high school in Denver, and their experience assimilating to and growing as multilingual learners. It's just a great story. If you want to really know what it's like to be a refugee student in America, this is a great story to read, as well as it also focuses on the parents and interviews them. Another one is 50 Strategies for Teaching English Language Learners by Adrienne Harrell and Michael Jordan. Not that Michael Jordan. But this one also focuses on different strategies you can use in your classroom for teaching English language learners. I use this book almost every single day. I love this book. Another one is Supporting Our Newcomer Students. So it's Advocacy and Instruction for English Language Learners by Catherine Davies Samway, Lucinda Pease Alvarez, and Laura Alvarez. This book is just a great way to learn how to advocate for your students as well and support them in your classroom. So I cannot recommend these books enough. Okay, so this is like my big dream. I would love to do this one day, whether it's creating it when I go on to earn my doctorate and have to write a thesis. This is kind of what I would love to do. But I would love to have a program or create a program at UNC where with education students K through 12, where they can go into schools like mine who have high populations of refugee learners to support their development of reading and their parents as well, either before their practicums and student teaching or during their practicums. This will allow them to also have more support slash mentor maybe a refugee student as well, and observe classrooms like mine, because I never had an experience in a classroom like mine. I wasn't a CLD emphasis, and I feel like it is so important that pre-teachers learn this stuff, like how to work with these students and how to support them the best of their ability. So I think it would be so cool to create either a program or add it to a class where the students go in and observe classrooms like mine. And then just build that relationship in that community for the refugee students and show that they have more support. And so, yeah. And then these are my resources and my articles that I read. So thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed my presentation. Bye.